Welcome to Coachable Wealth, where we blend the worlds of sports and finance to bring you strategies as you navigate your wealth-building journey. John, Cody, and Shawn are here to help you elevate your financial advisor relationship to meet your long-term goals. Now let's get to it.
All right, how was everybody's weekend? A lot of rain and heat last week, but it was gorgeous weather-wise.
Yeah, this weekend was really nice, especially after what we had 5 straight days of rain pretty much all day long, or at least like drizzling.
Yeah.
Did a bunch of stuff outside, did some yard work, planted some more grass. Yeah, just went on some walks with the dogs, but it was a good weekend. How about you guys?
Yeah, it's been wedding season for me here recently. Been I don't know how many weddings the last couple weeks, but also too just it's good to get out Saturday morning football practice, local high school here, so it's always good. And fall's back.
How much longer do you have the everyday practices?
So there's 2 practices a day for this week, and then Saturday we have our scrimmage, and then next week is game week.
Oh, nice. The scrimmage, do you play your own team, or do you guys have that lined up with another local school?
No, another school.
Okay, awesome. Do you have any idea how you guys are supposed to be this year?
It's hard. I feel like as a coach, it's always hard to tell until it's real.
Yeah.
I've had teams that have looked unbelievably good even in our first scrimmage and then go 0-10. So it's so strange how much sports changes throughout the year.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Philadelphia Phillies are going through that a little bit right now.
The Phillies are struggling so bad right now. Or they just go 1-3 against the Diamondbacks. I know the Diamondbacks have been playing really good baseball here recently, but still.
I saw an interesting, I don't know if it was on ESPN or where I saw it, but they were talking about the 3 major professional leagues, NBA, NFL, and MLB, and they're talking about typically the most talented team does not have the most success.
Like the most wins?
Yeah. Championships or wins.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, I know the Kansas City Chiefs are on a run. I mean, you think back to the NBA, the Bulls, the Warriors, Spurs. I mean, they've made some runs, but typically, I mean, a lot of those most talented teams, I mean, they have such good regular seasons. I mean, it's so hard to make it, I feel like, win a championship.
Yeah, it normally comes down to just a couple players just going off, like for the Chiefs, for an example. Besides Mahomes and obviously Travis Kelce and some players in their defense, they really don't have any big name superstars.
Right. To have those long-term dynasties, it seems like the landscape is getting harder and harder to achieve that. Just kind of with free agency and salary cap, it just seems like it's getting harder to have those dynasties in professional sports anymore.
And then, you win a Super Bowl, and next thing you know, everybody on the team wants a max contract, so...
Yeah, everybody, like the players-wise, or all the coaches are getting picked to go to another team, like your offensive coordinator, your defensive. That's what happened to the Eagles. They lost everybody, like all their coaches.
Yeah. I think it's the same in the big-time college athletic landscape, too. The years of having someone repeat like Alabama did a couple years in college football, I think it's going to be tough to have that going forward, too.
Yeah, it'll be tough. You think back the last couple years, I feel like TCU's been pretty good. They're not paying their players near as much as someone would get at Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. I mean, even Penn State, they're not putting out the amount of money. So one of their players has a huge year. Is he going to stay there, or is he going to go somewhere else and make $1 million or a couple million in a year in college football?
Right.
So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that changes going forward too.
I know we talked about this before, but look at Washington. They were in the national title game last year. There's not one coach or starter from that team last year who's still there. That's insane.
That really is insane. How many of their players went to the NFL? It had to be a decent amount. Like, it's not like they all transferred away.
I'm not sure. I mean, it was all the starters. So I'm sure there's going to be backups and role players that are still on the team. But I know a lot of starters went to Bama, followed the coach.
Yeah.
A good amount went to the NFL because obviously they did have a good season. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, it's some good guys. So it's just when I heard that, I was like, that's unbelievable. How do you come, a touchdown or 2 away from winning the national title? Like, it was a close game, if I remember correctly, for at least a period of time. And then everybody wants to leave. That's insane.
Yeah. That really is insane.
That's kind of what the NIL is kind of doing to the sport. It's just professionalizing it. I mean, it's all about where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? Hey, maybe I'm at Washington this year. Maybe Alabama offers me next year. Chances are I'm probably going to jump ship and follow that higher dollar amount to the next school. I think that loyalty factor is kind of going away, unfortunately.
That's actually a good point. So regarding like jumping ship and going to something that's potentially a little better, even if it is shorter term. So far, year to date, we've had a pretty good year in the stock market. We've had a sell-off here recently. I know a lot of people were calling in asking about some of the large cap tech stocks that did very well, but they've seen a pretty large sell-off here over the last month. How do you guys talk to clients, whether it's trying to change into a different position, get out of something, going into another one, and especially if they're just looking shorter term, like we're potentially talking about in sports, shorter term, like on a 1 year basis or even shorter?
I think that's where the benefit of having an advisor comes in, because I think most of what we do is counseling, not necessarily picking, ABC or XYZ stock. It's, trying to make sure clients don't get in their own way by thinking short term when they should be thinking long term. And what was the week long, the return for the week last week was almost flat, right?
Yeah.
Everyone looked at Monday, the market was down 2.5%. By the end of the week, we were practically flat. So I think it's our job to tell clients to take the emotion out of it. Don't make short-term decisions that you're going to regret later. And there's always going to be something. I mean, whether it was COVID, before that it was Ebola, or it was the .com, or there's always something
Yep.
that we need to help clients get through.
I wish we could pull it up, but I'm sure you guys both have seen it. S&P 500 chart, and I think it dates back to 1922, where it shows historical events of reasons to sell.
Yeah.
But it goes through that whole time period from 1922 or 23 to I don't know, it might even be 2022. But it shows all those dates. But it shows the declines in the S&P 500, the inclines. But then if you take it through that long term, I mean, it's still showing those historical averages of 8-9% annualized
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah, I definitely like that chart. Another couple charts that I really like a lot are one of the charts actually that you sent over recently, John, was going over looking back since the mid 1920s till the end of last year, the percent of years that had a 5% decline or worse, 10%, 15%, or 20%. 94% of a single year, you're going to have a decline of 5% or worse. Over 64% of the time, you're going to have a decline of 10% or worse inside just a single year. Almost half the time, you're going to have a decline of 15% or worse. And then almost a quarter of the time, on a yearly basis, you're going to have a decline of 20% or worse. And this is just in the S&P 500. That volatility is going to be even higher inside of individual stocks. And it just goes back to, you have to make sure, working with your advisor, you can weather the storm when we have these downturns and do proactive things that can benefit you in the long haul when we do have the volatility in the market.
Yeah, and they are normal. I mean, it's just kind of the life cycle of the market. I mean, I think that just comes back to the conversation around diversification and your risk tolerance. Is your portfolio fitting what you want to do? And are you diversified properly?
Yep. The other chart I really like a lot is from JP Morgan that goes back to the 1980s till year to date. And it goes over the average yearly decline that we see from the top. And the average yearly decline is around 14%, which makes sense if you go back to some of those numbers I just read out. But 33 of the 44 years still ended positive. So knowing there's a potential sell-off of around 14% on an annual basis, but still being positive 33 out of 44 times, that's obviously just, sticking to the long haul. And even when you have the downturn, still making the best use of it, which hopefully the Phillies are in right now.
I would also say a lot of this what kind of happened last week when we had that 1,000-point drawdown. Again, it is short term.
Yeah.
A lot of these events, I bet you by year end of this year, you're never going to remember what caused that drawdown. Short term blip on the radar.
And I also think most people can't even explain why we had that drawdown on Monday. Like if they're going to go into the minute details of explaining all the money that was borrowed from Japan, and Japan raised the interest rate, and that's why there was a huge, decline on money, like a lot. That's way over, a lot of people's heads. Not saying they're not smart enough. I'm sure they are, but they just don't have the time to do all the research into the background.
Yeah, it's a great point, Cody. It's almost a perfect storm of events.
Yeah.
That kind of happened, on a Saturday and Sunday when the news cycles were kind of slower. And then everyone woke up on a Monday morning. They're like, holy smokes, all these things are going on. I mean, Warren Buffett's selling a huge chunk of Apple. Cody talked about currency, interest rates. I mean, there are all kinds of different news stories out there that kind of factored into the drawdown.
Yeah. And not saying that it couldn't continue, but as John was saying, it's just making sure that you have the right risk tolerance. So when we do have sell-offs like this, you can weather it, and maybe there's some rebalancing opportunities when you do have a larger sell-off, because we're still only down 10% in the NASDAQ. The S&P 500 is only down 5%, so this really isn't that large of a sell-off at all. One other line I heard recently that I think is really good is people don't complain about the volatility in the stock market on the upside. They only complain about it on the downside. When you have 2 to 3% volatility days to the upside, nobody's complaining about it. But when you have it on the downside, that's where you start complaining about it. And tying it back to the Phillies, we definitely were not complaining when the Phillies had the very hot start to the year. Wasn't it like their best start in franchise history?
Yeah, ever, I believe.
Yeah. But now here recently, everyone's starting to get very concerned. But it's still the exact same team. Granted, they've had some injuries pop up, but it's still the exact same team.
Realistically, I mean, if you think about it, say you woke up on January 1 of this year and you just checked your portfolio at market close on Friday, you're still up year to date. Very nice percent.
And you're still up almost 13%.
Yeah. It just kind of shows you all those intraday news cycles and creating that short-term focus versus long-term focus, the results that you can have, that mindset.
It's like the worst thing you can do when your team is losing is watch ESPN, because ESPN will tell you that the sky is falling. They need to move the team to a different city, get rid of the coach and trade everybody away.
Oh, that's true. Same thing going back to investing too. So if you just think back to like June or July, just to pick out one individual stock, for example, because a lot of people are talking about NVIDIA. NVIDIA is still up over 110% year to date. Back in June, July, it was up 170. I can't say guarantee, but I bet if you turned on any of the investing news channels like CNBC, some of the other ones, I bet they all were talking about how good NVIDIA was. And then we've had the sell-off here recently, and I'm not sure if that's the same talking heads that they're having.
Yeah, like the Phillies, like you guys both said, they started out the first 2-3 months the best record ever. I mean, they were just winning every series, winning games by multiple runs. Everyone was talking about the team winning 12 games.
Yeah.
They were just expecting them to stay at this pace over 162 games without any injuries or maybe blips on the radar. But realistically, that's just not going to happen. And the Phillies are kind of seeing that slump right now. I mean, they are well below 500 since the All-Star break.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if they're going to hit 100 wins at this point.
No, they'll be lucky to hit 90. Do a little better than that.
they better hit 90. But yeah, they're 17-23 in their last 40 games, which is crazy to think about that number. But yet they still are very close to having the MLB best record because their start was so good. And I mean, that's the same thing of what we just talked about in the stock market. Like you were saying, John, if you just woke up now or just looked at your portfolio now from the beginning of the year and seeing that the S&P 500 is up almost 13%, you wouldn't have any idea that we just had a 5 to 10% sell-off. You would still be happy. But obviously, since we've had that in the short term, that sell-off, people get concerned. And going into the football season now, I think every team's had their first preseason game, right?
Yeah, I already saw the negative sentiment coming out about the Eagles offense, and not a single starter played in the Eagles offense on Friday night, the first game. They're already like talking about it.
Oh my gosh, I'm not surprised. That's Philadelphia sports, though.
Yeah.
I mean, just like the news or any, sports news or finance investment news that, I guess they need jobs too, right?
Yeah, they're going to do whatever they can do to get the clicks on their article. It is tough watching the Phillies though over this last streak of 40 games, or I think it's even like I think over the last 60 games, which is getting close to half the season. I think they're below 500, and it's honestly all aspects of the team. It's the pitching, it's the hitting. Like I just looked up in the last 40 games, the Phillies have the 5th worst ERA in baseball. Which at the beginning of the season, they had the best ERA by far. You combine that with also how bad the hitting is over the last 40 games. There's only one player that's hitting over a 270 average, and it's Castellanos. Every other player is hitting below 270, which is literally, if you went back to the beginning of the season or when they had the best record, the only person on the team that was struggling was Castellanos. And now it's the complete opposite. It just shows that everything goes back to the mean eventually.
I also think it goes back to, get back to the fundamentals too.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the Phillies, they're not having fun anymore. Like they're almost like straight away from the fundamentals that got them there and the strategy. I typically watch them every day, and then I'll tune into the post-game show too, which is probably a big mistake because that's kind of watching the news headlines here in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or whatever. So that's probably a bad negative sentiment on my part to do that. But I don't know. Like Cody said, it's just not one like single aspect of the game. It's all over.
Everything.
Pitching, it's batting, it's fielding. I mean, they're just struggling overall.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll turn it around. Obviously, we still have we still have well over a month left in the season. So still plenty of time to pick it up. And I mean, I would much rather them get hot going into the playoffs than being very hot right now.
Yeah.
So hopefully their streak wasn't just the beginning of the season and then they just cool off the rest of the season. Hopefully they can pick that back up.
Yeah.
Thoughts on how the Olympics went overall, because that just finished this past weekend.
I'll tell you what, I watched all of the men's basketball, watched them win gold. That turned out to be a pretty good game. I mean, France, they got some good players on their side.
They pretty much have all NBA players too, right? I think everybody on their team was in the NBA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see the USA win. They also won gold in women's basketball too. That was a crazy game. I didn't watch all of it, but I saw the highlights of the woman who thought she hit the 3-pointer for France to send it into overtime, but her foot was on the line, so USA won by 1. That's heartbreaking. I mean, good for the US, but that really stings for France.
I know we talked about I think Shawn mentioned in previous podcasts about the white elephants of kind of previous host cities, but I thought Paris was a great host city. The venues were good, some of the scenery. I mean, I thought overall it was a good Olympics.
Yeah, besides the poor swimmers that had to swim in the river.
Yeah,
I think I saw a decent amount of them that tried to swim in it, because obviously the triathlon still went forward swimming in it. I think a lot of them ended up getting sick.
Yeah,
which really stinks. A bunch of different sports are coming back in 2028 in LA for the first time ever. They're bringing flag football, which will be interesting. They're bringing baseball back, softball back. What other sports? Oh, cricket they're bringing back, lacrosse. So they're bringing back a decent amount of sports, which will be good. I saw the MLB was also potentially saying that hopefully the games, they can do it around the All-Star break, and baseball, like MLB, will take a break so a lot of the players can play, because that would be awesome if you have all the best players playing.
Yeah.
I mean, series and it's December and you hit a foul ball and your hand feels like it's going to fall off because they took a month off.
Good point. That would be awful in Philadelphia. It already starts to get cold at the end of obviously all October, but especially the end. I remember when I went to the NLCS and the World Series in 2022, I had to bundle up. It was definitely cold. What other things are top of mind here for you guys going into the next couple of weeks? I know we have some big inflation numbers this week and some next week. Anything else top of mind?
I think just the horizon in September. I think it's all coming back to the interest rates and kind of what is the Fed going to do. I know there's a lot of different scenarios on the table right now. I think they're probably going to, at the minimum, at least do 25 basis points. But then you hear people talk about 50 or 75 or even doing an emergency. I think that might be a little premature, creating some additional unneeded news cycles here. But it sounds like a lot's kind of just on hold until that happens in a couple weeks there.
I assume depend on the numbers that come out this week and next week. So this week we have CPI, then next week we have PPI. So it'll be interesting to see how the inflation numbers are and what the Fed does in, middle of September. I know that's top of mind for a lot of people.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning just talking about inflation again, about how inflation hurts most for the things that we can't skimp on. Basically, housing, transportation, food. I feel like a lot of those are the items that everyone's talking about. You go to the grocery store, prices are still high. I know that going to a restaurant is discretionary, but you go out to a restaurant, you noticeably see the increase in prices and maybe even smaller portion sizes. But it just seems like all those things that you need on a day-to-day basis, I mean, that's really sticking out right now.
And the unfortunate thing is most likely, I shouldn't say never, but most likely they aren't going to go down in price.
Right.
Because if they go down in price, that means we're having deflation, which obviously we do not want to have. We just hope that the prices stay here and barely increase over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
if they do at all.
And it sounds like insurance too, not life insurance, but property and casualty, especially in Florida. I mean, you keep hearing stories about how homeowners is just like the premiums are spiking. I mean, they're going up 25-30% from like previous year premiums.
Yeah, which can be a big cost, especially for someone going into retirement or in retirement.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, a lot of people who are in retirement, I mean, they're living on a fixed income, and maybe their income sources are limited to Social Security, maybe a pension plan that has no growth. So as those items do continue to increase, their income is just more and more stretched.
Yep. All right. Anything else top of mind for you guys? Hopefully the Phillies can wake up. I think they have an easier schedule here over the next couple weeks, which hopefully will get them back on the right track. Because I know they definitely have had a tough schedule of the last 40 games, but if you're going to be the best, you got to beat the best.
I guess my optimism there is just that you got to keep that 162 game focus, and maybe it's time to get the Phillies theme song out of the bag, like they did.
Oh yeah,
years. I keep hearing rumblings of that.
You never know. Could work. Yeah. I say, bring it back.
We need some positive vibes.
What was that called? Dancing on My Own by Callum Scott. Yeah, I say they bring that back. start get going on the right track again.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Coachable Wealth, brought to you by Morton Brown Family Wealth, an SEC registered investment advisor. This podcast is designed for educational and informational purposes and not intended as investment advice. More information can be found at www.mortonbrownfw.com.